Chapters 14 and 15 of The Magician's Elephant by Kate DiCamillo. In the house of the Countess, in the dark and empty ballroom, the elephant slept. She dreamed she was walking across a wide savanna. The sky above her was a brilliant blue. She could feel the warmth of the sun on her back. In her dream, the boy appeared a long way ahead of her and stood waiting. When she at last drew close to him, he looked at her as he had done that afternoon. But he said nothing. He simply fell into step beside her. They walked together through the tall grass, and the elephant, in her dream, thought that this was a wonderful thing, to walk beside the boy. She felt that things were exactly as they should be, and she was happy. The sun was so warm. In the prison, the magician lay upon his cloak, staring up at the window, hoping for the clouds to break and the bright star to appear. He could no longer sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the elephant crashing through the ceiling of the opera house and landing on top of Madame Lavon. The image bedeviled him to the point where he could get no rest, no respite. All he could think of was the elephant and the amazing, stupendous magic he had performed to call her forth. At the same time, he was achingly, devastatingly lonely, and he wished with the whole of his heart to see a face, any human face. He would have been delighted, pleased beyond measure, to gaze upon even the accusatory, pleading countenance of the crippled Madame Lavon. If she appeared beside him right now, he would show her the star that was sometimes visible through his window. He would say to her, "Have you in truth ever seen something so heartbreakingly lovely? What are we to make of a world where stars shine bright in the midst of so much darkness and gloom?" All of which is to say that the magician was awake that night when the outer door of the prison clanged open and two sets of footsteps sounded down the long hallway. He stood. He put on his cloak. He looked out through the bars of his cell and saw the light of a lantern shining in the darkened hallway. His heart leaped inside him. He called out to the approaching light. And what did the magician say? You know full well the words he spoke. "I intended only lilies," shouted the magician. "Please, I intended only a bouquet of lilies." In the light from the lantern that Leo Matien held aloft, Peter could see the magician all too clearly. His beard was long and wild, his fingernails ragged and torn, his cloak covered in a patina of mold. His eyes burned bright, but they were the eyes of a cornered animal, desperate and pleading and angry all at once. Peter's heart sank. This man did not look as if he could perform any magic at all, much less the huge magic, the tremendous magic of sending an elephant home. "Who are you?" said the magician. "Who has sent you?" "My name is Leo Matien," said Leo, "and this is Peter Augustus Duchesne, and we have come to speak to you about the elephant." Of course," said the magician. "What else would you speak to me of but the elephant?" "We want you to do the magic that will send her home," said Peter. The magician laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Send her home, you say? And why would I do that?" "Because you will die if you do not," said Peter. "And why would she die?" "She's homesick," said Peter. "I think her heart is broken." "A homesick, broken-hearted magic trick," said the magician. He laughed again. He shook his head. "It was all so magnificent when it happened. It was all so wondrous when it occurred. You would not believe it. Truly, you would not. And look what it has come to." Somewhere in the prison, someone was crying. It was the kind of strangled weeping that Vilna Lutz sometimes gave himself over to when he thought Peter was asleep. The world is broken, thought Peter, and it cannot be fixed. The magician kept still, his head pressed against the bars. The sound of the prisoner weeping rose and fell, and then Peter saw that the magician was crying too. Great, lonely tears rolled down his face and disappeared into his beard. Maybe it was not too late after all. "I believe," said Peter very quietly. "What do you believe?" said the magician without moving. "I believe that all things can be set right. I believe that you can perform the necessary magic." The magician shook his head. "No." He said the word quietly, as if he were speaking it to himself. "No." There was a long silence. Leo Matien cleared his throat once and then again. He opened his mouth and spoke two simple words. He said, "What if?" The magician raised his head and then looked at the policeman. "What if?" he said. "What if is a question that belongs to magic." "Yes," said Leo, "to magic and also to the world in which we live every day. So, What if? What if you merely tried? I tried already, said the magician. I tried and failed to send her back. The tears continued to roll down his face. You must understand, I did not want to send her back. She was the finest magic I have ever performed. To return her to where she belongs would be a fine magic too, said Leo Matien. So you say, said the magician. He looked at Leo Matien and then at Peter and then back again at Leo Matien. Please, said Peter. The light from the lantern in Leo's outstretched arm flickered, and the magician's shadow cast on the wall behind him reared back suddenly and then grew larger. The shadow stood apart from him as if it were another creature entirely, watching over him, waiting anxiously, along with Peter, for the magician to decide what seemed to be the fate of the entire universe. Very well, said the magician at last. I will try, but I will need two things. I will need the elephant, for I cannot make her disappear without her being present, and I will need Madame Lavon. You must bring both the elephant and the noblewoman here to me. Here's a picture of the magician, and it kind of sets that dark and eerie mood that is the prison where the magician is. But that is impossible, said Peter. Magic is always impossible, said the magician. It begins with the impossible and ends with the impossible and is impossible in between. That is why it's magic. Chapter 15. Madame Lavon was often kept awake at night by shooting pains in her legs, and because she was awake, she insisted that the whole household stay awake with her. Further, she insisted that they listen again to the story of how she had excuse me, how she had dressed for the theater that night, how she had walked into the building, walked on her own two legs, entirely and absolutely innocent of the fate that awaited her inside. She insisted that the gardener and the cook, the serving maids and the chambermaids pretend to be interested as she spoke again of how the magician had selected her from among the sea of hopefuls, who then will come before me and receive my magic. Those were his exact words, said Madame Lavon. The assembled servants listened, or pretended to, as the noblewoman spoke of the elephant falling from nowhere, of how one minute the notion of an elephant was inconceivable, and the next the elephant was an irrefutable fact in her lap. Crippled, said Madame Lavon in conclusion, crippled by an elephant that came through the roof. The servants knew these last words so well, so intimately, that they had mouthed them along with her, whispering the phrases together as if they were participating in some odd and arcane religious ceremony. This, then, is what was taking place in the house of Madame Lavon that evening when there came a knock at the door, and the butler appeared beside Hans Ickman to announce that there was a policeman waiting outside, and that this policeman absolutely insisted on speaking to Madame Lavon. At this hour? Said Hans Ickman. But he followed the butler to the door, and there indeed stood a policeman, a short man with a ridiculously large mustache. The policeman stepped forward and bowed and said, Good evening. I am Leo Matien. I serve with Her Majesty's police force. I am not, however, here on official business. I have come instead with a most unusual personal request for Madame Lavon. Madame Lavon cannot be disturbed, said Hans Ickman. The hour's late, and she is in pain. Please, said a small voice. Hans Ickman saw then that there was a boy standing behind the policeman, and that he held a soldier's hat in his hand. It is important, said the boy. The manservant looked into the boy's eyes and saw himself, young again and still capable of believing in miracles, standing on the bank of the river with his brothers, the white dog, suspended in midair. Please, said the boy. And suddenly it came to Hans Ickman the name of the little white dog, Rose. She was called Rose, and remembering it was like fitting a piece of puzzle into place. He felt a wonderful certainty. The impossible, he thought, the impossible is about to happen again. He looked past the policeman and the boy and into the darkness beyond them. He saw something swirl through the air, a snowflake, and then another, and another. Come in, said Hans Ickman. He swung the door wide. You must come inside now. The snow has begun. It had indeed begun to snow. It was snowing over the whole of the city of Baltise. The snow fell in the darkened alleys and on the newly repaired tiles of the opera house. It settled atop the turrets of the prison and on the roof of the apartment's polonaise. At the home of the Countess Quintet, the snow worked to outline the graceful curve of the handle on the elephant door, and at the cathedral it formed fanciful and slightly ridiculous caps for the heads of the gargoyles who crouched together, gazing down at the city in disgust and envy. The snow danced around the circles of light that pulsed from the lamps lining the wide boulevards of the city of Baltise. The snow fell in a curtain of white all around the bleak and unprepossessing building that was the orphanage of the Sisters of Perpetual Light, as if it were working very hard to hide the place from view. The snow at last fell. And here's the snow coming down in the orphanage. And as it snowed, Bartok Wynn dreamed. He dreamed of carving. He dreamed of doing the work he knew and loved, coaxing figures from stone. Only in his dream he did not carve gargoyles, but humans. One was a boy wearing a hat, another a man with a mustache, and another a woman sitting, with a man standing at attention behind her. And each time a new person appeared beneath his hand, Bartok Wynn was astonished and deeply moved. "You," he said as he worked, "and you, and you, and you." He smiled, and because it was a dream, the people he had fashioned from stone smiled back at him. As the snow fell, Sister Marie, who sat by the door of the orphanage of the Sisters of Perpetual Light, dreamed too. She dreamed that she was flying high over the world, her habit spread out on either side of her like dark wings. She was terribly pleased because she had always, secretly, deep within her heart, believed that she could fly, and now here she was doing what she had long suspected she could do, and she could not deny that it was gratifying in the extreme. Sister Marie looked down at the world below her, and saw millions and millions of stars and thought, "I am not flying over the earth at all. Why am I flying higher than that? I am flying over the very tops of the stars. I am looking down at the sky." And then she realized that no, it was the earth that she was flying over, and that she was looking not at the stars, but at the creatures of the world, and that they were each, beggars, dogs, orphans, kings, elephants, soldiers, emitting pulses of light. The whole of creation glowed. Sister Marie's heart grew large in her chest, and her heart, expanding in such a way, allowed her to fly higher and then higher still. But no matter how high she flew, she never lost sight of the glowing earth below her. "Oh," said Sister Marie out loud in her sleep, in her chair by the door. "How wonderful! Didn't I know it? I did! I did! I knew it all along." We're going to stop there for today. We'll do 16 and 17 tomorrow. I will talk to you later, kiddos. See ya.